eyes, we think of it as bringing information into our brains, but our eyes really screen away information. Our eyes only see a very narrow aspect of the light spectrum. What I think mystical experiences are, at least perhaps, are opening ourselves to wider reaches of the universe, wider realities. You know, we're told in a scriptural story about Moses feeling some kind of fear when encountering Allah, and maybe some of that fear and trembling was a little bit about it, because I really felt I was experiencing something that was unfamiliar. I think experiences of these kinds are very blissful, and they change one's life. You know, I wake up every morning, and as my eyes open, I see a universe I didn't create, humanity didn't create. It's given to us, it's a gift. And I want to know, how do I best live my life to treasure this sacred universe? And I say sacred because it's given to us as a gift. I individually went after some of the greatest astrophysicists to talk about the Big Bang Theory and to explain, but everyone that great speaker of world renown on this topic will say, we explain reality from the second that there is reality, and we have nothing to say about where did reality come from. Why is there a reality? No scientist can explain how the physical matter of the brain produces mind or consciousness. At a near-death experience, we see the shutting down of the physical brain, that there's something about mind and consciousness that is beyond the physical brain, and those NDEs, those near-death experiences, are exactly the moments where we sense mind and consciousness beyond the physical brain. The words spiritual and religious, by the way, really in English mean the same thing. And they both mean that I'm trying to connect myself with something higher or more than this finite physical world. I think the core of spirituality comes down to one emotional state: wonder. Wonder is the experience of something that we don't understand. It surpasses us. So if you look at these attributes, a sense that there's a grander reality than my brain can understand, that I'm attracted towards it, that I put my selfish concerns aside and care about a larger reality and want to care for it. These are what I think all spiritual experiences have. Religion, to me, at its very best, is about cultivating a sense of wonder for the universe, opening up our sense that there's more to reality than our brains can fully do, to draw us out towards it, to appreciate how sacred this universe is, and to make us have compassion and care for it. William James understood the brain in the best terms of the medical science of his day. And yet he said there's something more, and it's religious experiences that show us there is a metaphysical reality and perhaps a meta-consciousness. I think there's more ability to talk about spiritual philosophy today than at any time in world history. This podcast right today, taking over 2 continents, and I'm trying to quick guesstimate 10,000 miles apart, is an example of that. I've been teaching for 43 years. I was in college for 8 years before that, studying these things. So 51 years of my life have been spent studying the religions of the world. And I will say that I lean to that position that there is a common core running throughout history and throughout the world regions. I think that at that level, one might say that all religions converge, and there's no disagreement on the principles that Sufi represents. I think you will find people in all world religious traditions have championed those same themes. Mm-hmm. And I think this metaphysical curiosity, and we're drawn to it. We want to connect with it. I think that you will find that in almost all places in human history.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نرحب بكم في سلسلة حوارات فكرية ومعرفية على قناة حيرة. In this interview, we are interviewing Professor Robert Fuller from the United States, and Professor Fuller is currently a professor in Bradley University. He received his PhD from the University of Chicago in the fields of religion and psychological studies and American religion. He teaches courses titled Survey of Eastern Religion, Religion in Contemporary America, A Philosophical Description of the Human Condition, and the Psychology of Religion. Professor Fuller's research concerns the relationship between psychology and religion, as well as the study of contemporary religion in the United States. He published several books, and I mentioned several of them. The Body of Faith, a biological history of religion in America, Spirituality in the Flesh, Bodily Sources of Religious Experience, Wonder from Emotion to Spirituality, Religious Revolutionaries, and here are some interesting titles also. Spiritual but Not Religious, Understanding Unchurched America. Also Stairways to Heaven, Drugs in American Religious, also Religion and Wine, and the final name which I'll mention here is Alternative Medicine and American Religious Life. So it's a wide range of titles. So I hope we can manage to cover some different topics in this hopefully interesting interview.
Well, I'm pleased to be here, and let's have a fun conversation.
Thank you. So before we start in the academic questions which I imposed here, so let me ask you in the beginning about your personal life, your academic life, how it started, especially in the teenage age and the university, why you started, why you choose this field of spirituality and studying religion and psychology and all these stuff, why you were interested in this field.
Yeah, as a young man, I had myself some experiences that struck me as encountering a reality beyond the reality of the five physical senses. That I felt that I was connecting with something more than can be touched or seen or heard. And I was curious about that. And as I began college, I took classes in the study of religion and in the subject of psychology, and I just continued that investigation. And I guess I've been trying to figure those kinds of experiences out my whole academic career. A few things. I'm more interested in religious experiences than I am doctrines or creeds, beliefs, or even rituals. And I should also say that I have spent 43 years as a professor in an American university, and I am very committed to the standards of what we call evidence-based thinking, scientific thinking. I try to bring a rigor of reason to my writings and to my thinking. And so that I hold, at the end of the day, my allegiance is to clear thinking, rational thinking. But what I'm curious about are those experiences that humans have that seem to be at the edges of that, seem to defy easy understanding and explanation. I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea. So I'm curious about spirituality, but I retain the approach of a scholar.
Interesting introduction, Doctor. And what about, because when a person studies for decades about spirituality and psychology of religions and spiritual experiences, NDEs nowadays, mystical experiences even, right. I understand from a scientific point of view, but does this keep any influence or effect on a person's daily life in terms of spirituality, ethics, morality, virtues, or a certain type of spirituality or a religious dimension in his life that he likes to follow and improve?
Mm-hmm. Well, if I understand your question correctly, people who have these kinds of experiences change their orientation to reality a bit. They sense a preciousness, a sacredness to all of reality around them. And they then feel drawn to care for and protect a wider reality. So if I'm understanding right, was your question, what effect do these experiences have? There's two ways of thinking. What does it mean to be ethical, to have a morality? And one approach is that of obeying. You obey authority, the religious authorities, the political authorities, and you obey scripture. And people who have spiritual experiences tend to move to a different understanding of morality. Morality means to perceive and appreciate the importance of things around you. So that I would say this isn't an ethics of obedience, it's an ethics of reaching out to try to care for what's around you and to care with compassion and with empathy. So I think that spiritual experiences give us more sense of compassion for life around us and wanting to care for life around us. And so that ethics is reaching out to care more so than it is a concern with obeying and being obedient.
I meant more in my question, like when a person or professor like you, when he reads and engages or interacts with such studies, so what does this affect him on his personal life and in his spiritual path or in his path of ethics?
Oh, you mean on me particularly? Okay, now I understand, I think, your question a little better. I will say that when I began my intellectual life, I was more concerned with the absolute truth and reality of the experiences that I had. And the more time I spent in the academic world interacting with my friends who are scientists and asking these questions, I became more open to many different levels of experience. For example, perhaps when our neurochemistry gets altered, and our brain works with very sophisticated chemical compounds. We call them neurotransmitters. Among them are things called dopamine, serotonin, and we understand their effect on our thoughts and feelings. Clearly, these are involved with spiritual experiences. And I'm more open to understanding and taking scientific looks at what is happening in the brain that makes these kinds of experiences possible. But now I need to say that knowing about the effect that brain processes have, and if they're altered in one way or another, we're more likely to have mystical experiences. I think that's true. You alter the brain's chemistry in certain ways, you're more likely to have mystical experiences. Most scientists leave it there, and they say that all that mystical experiences are just mistakes in brain chemistry. I have a more openness to perhaps those are exactly the conditions. We know our brain was shaped by millions of years of evolution on this planet to be very practical for day-to-day activities, hunting food, finding water sources, interacting with other people. But experiencing a reality that goes beyond the five senses, our brain must somewhat move into another mode to experience that if it really exists. I always tell people, our eyes, we think of it as bringing information into our brains, but our eyes really screen away information. Our eyes only see a very narrow aspect of the light spectrum. And we see X-rays, for example. Our eyes don't see X-rays. We screen that out because it's not relevant to day-to-day physical survival. What I think mystical experiences are, at least perhaps, are opening ourselves to wider reaches of the universe, wider realities. At least I'm very open to ask these questions too, in a way most scientists aren't. So my particular way of studying mystical experience, religious experience, is that I'm open to both sides of the question. I'm open to what are the scientifically understandable mechanisms that make these experiences possible. And it gives me a certain skepticism that all the things people say about them may not be literally true. But I'm also open to the possibility that these are exactly then the kinds of changes in the brain that make new perspectives on reality that are quite possibly valid. So I guess what I'm saying is that I've tried to balance being appreciative of the possible validity of these while also being very concerned with understanding in the best scientific terms possible, how can we understand what's happening in the brain as that happens. I hope that, Andrew, but I've lived a life where I go back and forth too. I will say that in certain moments of my career, I leaned one more to accepting the complete validity of mystical experience. And then I've moved to the other side to being more skeptical because of my understanding of the psychology and brain processes of these experiences. And that's been what's exciting. I've a little bit changed my mind here and there and go back and forth, but I always feel like I'm learning and fine-tuning it better.
Great. I'll just impose maybe a third person questions before we proceed. And I'll ask you more about the mystical and spiritual experiences from a scientific point of view. But before that, so maybe during the experience of studying and teaching such studies, did you undergo or encounter or a smell or something near to such spiritual or emotional or mystical experiences, or as you want to call them, like you felt it by yourself, so you understood it from a more a deeper way, not just only conceptual, intellectual and conceptual way?
Yeah. Myself, so you're asking to what level I had these experiences, right? Well, yes, I have. And in my life, I have had certain distinct experiences that seemed powerfully real to me. And each of them had a little bit of sense that I knew I was encountering realities that are extraordinary. And it came with that sense of humbling. They were never fearful. They were never something that made me, afraid or feeling unworthy or belittled. But I did feel that small in comparison to what I was encountering. That I was encountering something of grander significance and importance in the universe. But never did I hear voices speak, or did I receive truths in that sense. And yet there was this sense that there is a more to the universe, and this is powerful to an individual, to always live with the sense of that there's something to be discovered or beyond one. It's humbling and brings humility. And I always had this strong belief that there was so much to reality I didn't understand.
And does it come when a person or when you're a person in a middle of meditation or praying, or in the middle of meditation maybe, or something?
Yes, a good question. And in my own experience, yes, it requires a setting aside day-to-day mindset. You have to become quiet. At least for me, these came. I did cultivate these by seeking some prayerful quietness, but it didn't involve any ritual movement or action on my part. It was just sitting quietly. It certainly did not require, I've actually written about and studied those who have used psychedelic drugs for these experiences. I have myself never used them. And so my experiences never included anything like that. But it required quietness and sitting aside, and I was definitely seeking those experiences, and so that they didn't come unexpectedly. They came as I was cultivating them in quiet prayer.
And doctor, it gives a person a sense of a very deep feeling or an emotional state which is different than ordinary or normal.
Yes, it had a sense of, we have a word in English called the uncanny. And the only thing I can tell you is it's a little unsettling, almost as though you might be reaching out and touching some small current of electricity. That it gives a little tingling and a little sense of approach of something that you better be a little careful with. And again, it wasn't that I was afraid. I was not afraid, but I also felt that this was a reality of which I should be somewhat careful about connecting. Maybe that's a little hard. I'm sorry, I hadn't really thought to put that into words, but it always had a little sense. You know, we're told in a scriptural story about Moses feeling some kind of fear when encountering Allah, and you maybe some of that fear and trembling was a little bit about it, because I really felt I was experiencing something that was unfamiliar, and that I needed to have a certain little bit of caution about what's unfamiliar, and yet it attracted me. So there you go. Attracting, and yet a little sense of my own humbleness or humility or vulnerability in relationship to that.
Also, in religious terms, they say that fear is not always negative, or that like I'm afraid for something, but fear sometimes can be positive in a way that a fear of the majestic manifestation that happens towards a person. So he fears it, he respects it, he feels it in a very deep way. And
I have attended groups of like-minded people, but I have never belonged to an organization that promoted this, really, or so this never led to me being connected with a religious institution of any kind. So I'm one of the many people in the world who do this without commitment to a specific faith tradition.
And such experiences, does it stay as a memory in the conscious or the unconscious mind of a person, like something that sticks there because it had its own its special favor or something?
Yeah, I don't know if you're asking me that, but you're right. But anyway, I think experiences of these kinds are very blissful, and they change one's life completely. If for no other reason, they convince you that there is more to reality than humanity can easily formulate. And this gives life a freshness, a curiosity, at least in my case, and most people I know, it has never led to people being closed-minded or dogmatic or insisting there's one truth. It usually it makes us hungry to learn more.
Well, great. Actually, this is a good start to ask the other questions. So in the beginning, Doctor, this is an important question, I think, in philosophy of religion, which is the origin of religions or spirituality in a wide sense. Yeah. So is it from human beings, from fear, from ignorance, from the politicians who wanted to control people, or no, there is certainly a metaphysical and a non-materialistic essence, as you just mentioned, I think so. You asked a great question, and I've been teaching college classes in introduction to thoughts about religion. And my university is not a religious university, or students can think in any way they wish to. I've been teaching this for many years, and I know students want me to tell them the one origin of religion, or the one thing it really is at its core. And I'm afraid that
I can't do that because there are so many manifestations of things that we call religion, and maybe each manifestation had its own different origin. Certainly, throughout human history, religion has had a lot to do with bringing about subordination to an authority. And there's no question about this, especially those of us who know anything from the countries that we might call of the book that come out of Judaism, Christianity, Islam. We know so much about there being traditions with authorities both within the religion and in the political realm for whom we're expected to have subordination. Human history is important because we as humans are not faster than all animals. We are not stronger than all animals, but how we survived is by cooperating and getting along in groups. And groups function best when there is submission to an authority. And so religion has clearly, throughout much of human history, worked alongside that. As a scholar and as someone who has my own income and freedom from any authority establishment, political or religious, I tend not to find that the part of religion that I have in highest esteem. I see why it's important for humans and why it has served us well, but I don't look at it as something that I admire the way I admire those forms of spirituality that are about, one, the curiosity of where did this universe come from? You know, I wake up every morning and as my eyes open, I see a universe I didn't create, humanity didn't create, it's given to us, it's a gift. And I want to know, how do I best live my life to treasure this sacred universe? And I say sacred because it's given to us as a gift. And how do I further it and care for it and protect it? And I would like to think that that's an important core of spirituality, this being presented with a universe that is unconditional, that is, goes beyond all the conditions that humans can influence. It is a universe given to us. And that is the stark reality that I most admire about religion. And I think that all of our spiritual disciplines are about cultivating this spark of life, and that we are part of this spark of life. And how do I best express it and radiate it out to the world around me? I would love to think of that, but there are so many expressions of religion, and you see so many. So I don't know that there's just a one, and I know that you'd think that there should, and then maybe other versions of it are the corruptions of it or something. But I've just seen so many kinds of religion that it's hard for me to say there is one early origin of religion or just one true kind of religion. So sorry. I'm confused even at this advanced late stage in my academic career of studying religion. I still can't identify a single core or historical origin.
So I can understand that you're trying to say that the major or the deep ontological questions which faces humanity, at least they can't be answered by materialistic or scientific methods only.
Well, the biggest questions can't, and scientists know this. Scientists can only tell us about what has shaped reality once there is a reality. I mean, one of my functions at my university has been to bring in speakers. I was in charge of the group that brought in, and we bring in speakers for the arts, and we bring them in for history and literature, but we bring them in science. And I individually went after some of the greatest astrophysicists to talk about the Big Bang Theory and to explain, but everyone that great speaker of world renown on this topic will say, we explain reality from the second that there is reality, and we have nothing to say about where did reality come from? Why is there a reality? One other way of putting it is, we can tell you all about the Big Bang, meaning, of course, the expansion of the universe into its many components today, but we can't tell you who put the Big Bang into motion, what put the Big Bang into motion, why it was put into motion. That's not science. And so I always embrace science. I just ask, and I think it was because of some of the spiritual experiences I had in my youth as a young college age individual. I ask questions beyond what science asks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in talking about the source of religions, or the some people, they talk about the essence of religions or the core of religions, and some philosophers, they said that there is a transcendent unity of religions. So I mean, when we talk about revelations, or when we talk about spirits of such great philosophers, wise people, or prophets, or saints, or so religions, before they were manifested in different institutions and dogmas and rituals and historical manifestations. So the essence that is after or beyond the materialistic existence of these religions. So can we say that that essence is related to a very high truth, which we can name it the ultimate truth, or God, or the extremes, or the creators? So I don't know.
Yeah, well, you asked the best questions that there are in the interested in all the forms of religion we have. And as you have expressed, there is a strong sense among scholars that there is a core element to these religious traditions, that individuals have had a sense of something, and I like to just use the word more than our senses, more than our physical brain can comprehend. And then each culture has a vocabulary, a history, a forms of literature, which provide vocabulary, the words that we use to fill this out. Religions are different because of those local vocabularies and literature and words that we use, but that there is this one single common core, and we can find it in all times of history and in all parts of the world. I lean to that. I find myself responding to that point of view. But there are other scholars who argue that no, that this is glossing over the real language of the people who have had these experiences and explain, and that there are no similarities behind the world. I lean to the similarities point of view. But I respect my scholarly friends who argue against me. But after I've been teaching for 43 years, I was in college for 8 years before that, studying these things. So 51 years of my life have been spent studying the religions of the world, and I will say that I lean to the that position that there is a common core running throughout history and throughout the world regions.
Doctor, there are many spiritual aspects in the life of human beings, and one of them we mentioned, the mystical experiences, and another one which we find now many reports, or maybe hundreds or thousands of people encountering such an experience all around the world with all different religion, even people who are not religious, which is the NDEs, the near-death experiences, because it's accidents that happen with different people, and then people come and they express what happened with them. So is it an illusion, or messages from the brain nerve system, and that can be analyzed scientifically and neglected to the scientific understanding only? Or it's a result from psychology, and you're a teacher in psychology, it's a result of the unconscious mind and the messages that he sends to us, that our deep personality, we face our deep personality? Or no, all these they can't, or they can explain it, but they can't explain the total reality of the experience. And then there is another dimension, as you mentioned, there is something beyond the senses, and it opens the door for a real question.
Yeah. Boy, you're giving me the hardest questions. I'm going to be very frustrating to you. What is mind? What is consciousness? Scientists still pursue this view the brain, the physical brain, the matter of the brain, produces mind, produces consciousness. And yet, no scientist can explain that. No scientist can explain how the physical matter of the brain produces mind or consciousness. At a near-death experience, we see the shutting down of the physical brain. If you approach this from the scientific point of view, all you're getting is the shutting down of the physical brain. If, however, you say the brain, the matter of the brain doesn't produce consciousness, it just organizes it, it just concentrates it within our individual self. And that consciousness, mind, goes beyond the physical brain. Then these can be experiences that have validity over and beyond. So here we have the clash. Those who take the point of view that it's the physical brain that produces mind and consciousness are going to argue there's no validity to the near-death experiences. They're just the shutting down signals of the physical brain. But those who approach it from the other point of view say that there's something about mind and consciousness that isn't reducible to the physical brain. The physical brain is just, if I'll put it, use again, organizing it within our individual selfhood, but it doesn't create it. It's there beyond our physical brains. For those who've had spiritual and mystical experiences, you are almost going to clearly lean to that second point of view, that there's something about mind and consciousness that is beyond the physical brain, and those NDEs, those near-death experiences, are exactly the moments where we sense mind and consciousness beyond the physical brain. But you're never going to convince the person. But I will point out on the science, and this is, I usually lean to the science point of view, but here's going to be my little point of view. I still think there's no evidence that it's the physical, the matter of the brain produces mind or consciousness. And I read extensively in this field, and researchers are working very hard to understand that. But we're in 2021, and there's no understanding of how the physical brain actually makes mind or makes consciousness. So there you go. There's our dilemma. And I will say that those who have had the mystical experiences are going to approach it differently than the scientists are.
I'll now represent the counter argument also regarding this question. So now people may pose this question, which is new laboratories in science in some places, they are trying to, with some of the tools, to keep it in the brain and in the body, and they try to reach a person to a certain joy, to a certain feeling when, for example, when he has a certain for example, desires, bodily desires, or even certain experiences. You mentioned the drugs, and there is some of the things that you eat, and you reach to a certain state where you have a very similar experience that happens with a person when he encounters a mystical experience. So they say we can now provide people with, I don't know, some food or some technologies or some tools that will enable them to live the same experiences, and the result, so this can be controlled materialistically.
That's very interesting. Yes, with sophisticated brain imaging, we can tell you what parts of the brain are lighting up and very active during some kinds of experiences, and we can tell you what parts of the brain kind of shut down during those experiences. That's true. But they don't tell you whether the experience is real or valid or just a mistake. I always try to liken it this way. I have a radio dial, and we have many radio stations that we can listen to, and I have to move my dial to one frequency, and when I move it there, I hear this whole radio. In 1 second, right here in my room right now are all these radio stations. And I don't hear them, they're unreal to me. But if I move my dial to a very specific frequency, all of a sudden, what was unmanifest becomes manifest. I hear this radio station, it's vivid. Well, to me, this is like those parts of the brain. It's true that we probably need to move our brain in certain ways to become receptive to those other radio frequencies, if I'm making this sense. The radio frequencies are real, but you need to move the dial to those points to be able to receive them. I think it's the same with these parts of the brain. It's probably true that they're lighting up. Certain parts are active and other parts are inactive during religious experiences. But that I'm probably claiming that the frequencies, the radio stations are really there. You just need to change the mechanism that will allow you to tap into them. I don't know if I quite conveyed that, but to me it's the same. Yeah, you're going to have to move the radio dial to a new point to receive that radio station. You're going to have to change brain processes to experience different perspectives on reality. So I don't think it explains it away. There's still the question. Psychology can tell us what circumstances make a religious experience more likely or less likely. It can't tell us whether those religious experiences are true or untrue, valid or not valid.
So psychology and science can't understand all the complexities and the realities and the truth, or what a person is actually witnessing in his feelings and emotions and in his all intellectual ability. It can reach to some analysis regarding what is happening with him, or like we can say it can know the surface of the thing, but it can't know the core and the real, what's happening really with this.
Right. And so I've remained appreciative of what the psychological science can tell us. I'm fascinated, and my students study this, but it can't get to finally the essence of it for the human being.
Mm-hmm. So a person or a researcher should always keep a place for further knowledge or further questions or further areas of truth that he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So, Doctor, here another question which is based on what we discussed. So, religions, when I mean religions, I don't mean the dogmas or certain rituals or certain social interaction with religions. I mean religion in its essence, just as we explained, the spiritual side, the experiences, the depth, the core, or if we can define. So religions or spirituality, can it be neglected to materialistic definitions? Obviously, we said that this can't be. And you're obviously familiar with Mيرسيا إلياد, the researcher in religion history, which he states that the need for religion is an existential need which is rooted in human beings in different cultures and societies throughout history, and is manifested through different theological doctrines, rituals, and practices. So he's talking about a need, a thirst that is innate, or like it is deep built in the human being function, the personality or reality.
Yeah, and by the way, for what it's worth, he was a professor at the University of Chicago, and he was in his very final years when I began there. So I had some interaction with Mīrsia Eliade early in my life. I know his theories, and he say it's constant in humanity at all times. I don't know. To be honest, I've known people who are utterly non-religious. They don't have much curiosity about the big questions, the ultimate questions of reality, and they don't. So I don't know if I could go so far as to say all humans,
or most or many, we can say.
The religious question is alive, but there's no question you cannot find a time in human history or a place in the world where even the majority of humans don't have these concerns about what is more than physical. We have this English word metaphysical, meaning beyond or more than what is physical. And I think this metaphysical curiosity, and we're drawn to it. We want to connect with it. I think that you will find that in almost all places in human history. That's why the religious question is, if you will, the perennial or found in all times, and it's the thread that you can find in all human cultures, all human times of life. So it is that. And even in the modern world, we see this, but we're seeing it in different ways. If you can think about this, most human beings have lived in a community in which they must conform to that to prosper and to get along. Your community monitors you. There's people gossip about you to keep your behavior in line and things. And so a lot of religion, by necessity, we've had to conform to what in our era, in our location, is the dominant form, and there's strong pressure on us to conform. In the modern world, we see less of that. First of all, for most of us, we are free from day-to-day fear of starvation and that, and we live in larger communities where we can escape that social monitoring that pressures us to conform. And also through modern media and internet and the like, we can connect with other people who are not conforming to our local way of life. And so there's less pressure to conform. I think throughout the world today, so this is my response to Iliad's view that we'll always see this. I think what we're seeing today is constant spirituality, but not conforming to local traditions and local customs and local authorities the way it did in any previous time of history. We're seeing a more expansive spirituality and people picking and choosing, people drawing from traditions that are very far away in time or mileage and distance from their local community. And people are finding what speaks to them, and they make sense to them, and can they find helpful in their thinking and feeling. So there's less conformity in religion. And so we even started this way when we were wondering to what extent today in our conversation, did religion come to create submission to authority? And that has been important for humans, but there's less of that today. Or at least there's more people who are free from that instant demand to do that. So we're seeing spirituality cut loose from the kinds of social demands that were placed on it previously. And that's why it's exciting. And this, but we see, so again, what I think Iliad predicted is that we weren't going to move to a non-religious, non-spiritual time in history. This is going to be consistent. I think this is what Iliad was saying. It's always going to be there. And he was saying that in a time that some people said, no, religion's humans past, we're going to move to a non-religious future. I think Iliad was telling us that's not true. It'll always be there. And I think he's been proven right. And I think that we're seeing it, but we're seeing it in some new forms. We're breaking out of some older molds, but it's not going away. And if anything, it's more alive and creative today.
And maybe also by using some hermeneutics tools in trying to understand or deepen the theory of Iliad, we can say that spiritual, not religion necessarily will stay, but religion in another manifestation, which is the spiritual dimension in the human being's life, or the ethical and the virtuous sides of the life of human beings, for example.
Yeah. And again, it does form a form of ethical sensitivity and a desire to reach out and care for the surrounding world, in the peoples and the economic, bringing more economic vitality to all people's lives, and freedom from oppression and caring for the environment. But it's a different kind of ethics today that we see spirituality generating than an ethics of obedience. So again, it's an ethics of caring and compassion and empathy is an ethics that I think you find in spirituality today, whereas we've been used to in the last few hundred years of an ethics in religion of obedience, and you're seeing less of that. That frightens some people, but I think it's being, and I say replaced, it's not as different as I'm maybe making it sound, but I think that we're seeing the budding of even a greater sense of ethical responsibility to participating. You know, for most of human history, the word God has meant a being who has power over reality, power over, and we should obey that power over us. And we should worship it, and we should obey it. I think that what's emerging in the spiritualities today is a new sense of God. It's not completely different, but God is that spiritual power within all of life, pushing it forward, pushing it to express itself. And that what it means to respond to God is saying, how do I co-create? How do I roll up my sleeves and become someone who in my life does things to further God's creation in the world, bring more peace, bring more love, bring more generosity and caring and compassion, and to keep the world safe and whole and vibrant. And what do I do to be an agent of God's ongoing creation of the universe? And I think that that's what the spiritualities today are more about. How do I make myself an agent, a being who can participate in the ongoing? The creation wasn't just something in the past, but it's something that goes on every day. And it's my responsibility to open up to that spiritual influence that enlivens me to energetically work for the ongoing creation of the universe. And that's spirituality too. And I think in my own personal view, that's the most important spirituality. And it always has been, the people who were spiritually sensitive in every time of history. But I think we're getting more of that today. I really do. And that's important.
This opens the door to talk about an interesting article that you have, which is titled Spiritual but Not Religious, and you use the four letters SBNR.
Yes. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. But that's a long phrase in English.
This is helpful. So instead of saying it all the time, so you can...
Yeah. Can I say some things that in my lifetime, if we go back just 50 years ago, in my country, the United States, the majority of people were Christian, and the majority of people belonged to a Christian. Now, in Christianity, we have both Catholic Christians and then Protestant Christians, but they're all Christianity, and people belong. Today, we find much less of that, and yet people will say, I'm still interested in spiritual issues. I have had spiritual experiences, but I don't belong to a religious organization. And we needed some phrase. The words spiritual and religious, by the way, really, really, really in English mean the same thing. And they both mean that I'm trying to connect myself with something higher or more than this finite physical world. But we've come to use the two words, even though they really mean the same thing. Spirituality is about within the individual and what goes on in our own thoughts, feelings, experiences. And in this way, we could talk about the spiritual disciplines of people throughout all of world history who have sought those inward experiences. And then we tend to use the word religion in the United States to mean the things we do when we come together in a public setting, the public rituals, the public doctrines, and the people who are have gone through training and become either rabbis or imams or we call them pastors, ministers, priests. In the Christian tradition, that's where we use the word religion. And so it is true that religion in the United States is less based on formal traditions, institutions tied specifically to Christianity or Judaism. And it just seems to be more people are reading and attending lectures and listening to podcasts to find ideas to explore their spirituality, and they don't feel connected, or they don't feel the need to belong to just one organization or profess just one set of doctrines or beliefs. And it's a very much difference, and it has changed in my lifetime.
Actually, I have several questions regarding the article. I'll see how I can keep them, but I was quoting something from the article. You refer to a movement which is transcendentalism. Which when like a person, Emerson puts it in a poetically when he proclaimed that while walking alone in nature, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I'm nothing. I see all. The currents of universal being circulate through me. I am part or parcel of God. Or also another person here you mentioned, which is Ralph Waldo Trine. He says, in just the degree that we come into a conscious realization of our oneness with the infinite life and open ourselves to the divine inflow, do we actualize in ourselves the qualities and powers of the infinite life. So if you'd like to comment about the...
Well, I will. And just quickly, for those who don't know, in American history, we're talking way back in the 1840s, so we're talking 170, 80 years ago, I guess. Listen to this. He was an ordained minister of a Protestant Christian church, but walking alone in nature. Now, not in a formal religious organization, not reading scripture. It was in nature. He let go. When he said, I let go of my mean egotism, he meant mean as in statistics. We talk about the mean, the median, the mode. He meant my everyday normal way of thinking. I let go of that. Remember, that's the thinking that attends us to physical reality, what we can touch. See, and then in the very moment he lets go of that thinking pattern that attends only to what is tangible and physical, he becomes receptive to the inflow, and he refers to God as universal being, right? The inflow of a spiritual power that is the ongoing creation of life, and it enlivens him. So he finds his ultimate spirituality not in a formal organized religious service, not while reading scripture, but while opening himself up. And I think and then you also, you quoted Ralph Waldo Trine, who said, when I open myself up to the infinite presence, this is something that different people can do better in different ways. This is why meditation was not talked about when I was a young boy in the United States. Now everyone, I'm not saying people do meditation, not everyone, but everyone knows about it, and it's talked about, and hence some people do pursue it. There's all kinds of people finding spiritual paths that open themselves up to this infinite presence, this currents of universal being. And this is what is the fastest growing trend in the United States, is religion of this sort. And this is what we then call being spiritual on an individual level, but not as interested in the public institutional membership belonging kinds of religion. And this is the fastest growing segment of religion in the United States.
I also quote an interesting sentence here from Maslow where he says religion's heaven is actually available in principle all through life. It is available to us now and is all around us. Authentic spirituality enables us to see the universal in and through the particular, and the eternal in and through the temporal and momentary.
Yeah, what we have always referred to as heaven isn't something that you wait for to when you die. It isn't something that's out there that a rocket ship needs to take you to. It's something that's available in all things if we but open up to it. And I think that's what that quote from Emerson, when alone in the woods, I let my normal waking thinking patterns go to the side, and I all of a sudden become receptive to the inflow of this universal being, this infinite presence. And it's available in the here and now of everyday life if we but learn those techniques to open to it. You know, you asked me earlier, did I ever have any spiritual experiences in myself? And I said, yes, and I was seeking it. You know, it didn't happen by total accident. I sat, but I just did it sitting quietly in chairs and relaxing, letting go. But just like Emerson said, I learned that I had to find some ways to let go of my normal concern with self and my everyday concerns and worries. And how do you let go of that, put it aside to become more inwardly receptive? And I find that there's people in my country anyway who are very curious about this. Now, it's a scale. Some people are extremely curious and want to do a lot to learn to do this. Others, it's a passing thought. It's almost like a fad, we call it, just like a new clothing style. Yet for a little while you're interested, but you lose interest over time. That's true. I don't want to make everybody seem greatly spiritual, but there's more interest in all of this now than there was say in the decade that I was born in 60, 70 years ago.
And Doctor, based on some of the information you mentioned in your article, so can we talk about an American spirituality? So it may be Western, it may be spread in many different societies and cultures, but at least because you're talking about America, so can we talk about an American spirituality which is being shaped nowadays or through the past decades, which is based on inner silence, meditation, appreciation of religious diversity, anti-institutional orientation towards the divine, and self-actualization and feeling the connection with a higher power, and some other aspects also. So can we talk about something that's being shaped and which has its own characteristics, which is separated from the institutional religion?
Yeah. Well, it has certain characteristics. First of all, the people drawn to this not only think it's their right to think for themselves. You know, in much of our religions in the United States that are based in synagogues or in temples or in church buildings, there's a sense in which the authority will tell you what to believe, and you must not question it, doubt it. You must have faith, and faith here means I'll just accept it because the authority tells me. The people drawn to this, and I'm going to go back, we call it SBNR, spiritual but not religious, think it's my right to say what is true for me. It's my right, in fact, maybe it's even my duty to say what is true for me. And I can only affirm what something I know deep down for myself is true for me. And so these people accept the thing that they can question and doubt and change their minds about beliefs. So this is an important characteristic. Two, I mentioned before, how is God understood? And in our churches, in our synagogues, God is thought of as a power over creation. But in the spiritual but not religious movement, God is thought of as a power from within. Not a power over, but a power from within. That there is a spiritual presence in our universe that through my life and your life, pushing life to be more expressive, to give more of expression to God's creation, to love, to creativity, and that we must open ourselves up to the inflow of this so that we become expressions of it, that we release it through our lives. And so it's a different understanding of God, not as a power to be obeyed, but a power to try to put our self-centeredness, our petty thoughts and feelings aside and to express that in our daily actions. So it's a kind of a different motivation, bringing with it a different ethics. Again, not an ethics of obedience, but an ethics of appreciating that all life needs us to engage it and to support it and care for it and nurture it. So it's very much a different. But then some people find in psychological writings, you mentioned an American psychologist named Abraham Maslow, who wrote about people who have what he called peak experiences, but he meant mystical experiences, spiritual experiences. And this gives them a new energy or power for creative living in the world. Many people study world religions to learn how different have all had their own spiritualities, their own techniques and methods for cultivating a sense of this divine presence. Some by the way, it sounds a little strange, but are interested in the environment and ecology and issues of nature, because they believe all of nature is sacred. Nature is given to humanity. It is itself a sacred reality, and humans are a part of it, and we must care for it and nurture it. And they find a certain sense of connectedness with what's sacred by it. They're concerned with environmental issues. But we've seen this in healing philosophies. And then we have in the United States an interest in what's called parapsychology. You mentioned near-death experiences, but people are interested in all kinds of telepathy, ESP. Now you say, well, why? Why is this anything spiritual? Because going back to that issue, is it the brain that produces mind and consciousness, or is mind and consciousness something that somehow is more than just the physical brain? And all of these kinds of interests are trying to reach out to thinking about that ways in which there's mind and consciousness more than just the human brain. And so these are all ways that humans are exploring these. So these are some of the trends and some of the attributes of this spiritual but not religious. But again, when even 20 years ago, I estimated, and I think my figures proved to be pretty accurate at the time, 19-20% of adult Americans identified this way. And in other words, they didn't identify that they were atheists or non-religious. They didn't identify that they were members of a religious organization, tradition. They were interested in spirituality and like some things in some religious traditions, but they feel they can pick and choose, that they can decide what's true for themselves in these. And now, especially among people under 40 years old, we think this number is as much as 40% of them. Now, again, they are religious, they are spiritual, but they're not, they believe they can participate in many traditions, not just one. And they don't feel confined to just one spiritual tradition. So it's alive and well, at least in my country.
I can now understand what you mentioned in the article, that many Americans will develop a spiritual hunger requiring them to leave established churches and follow Emerson's example of seeking out an original relation to the universe, as you mentioned now about the nature and other things. But there is a main question here, I think, and you answered a bit about this question, is that why do you think that the organized religion or the churches finally may become the major enemies of religious experience, as some thinkers state? So because people are always seeking freedom and seeking to be convinced of something that they follow, and to think rationally and to choose their own path, not to be forced to choose a path, or not to be directed, or because a person feels dignity and freedom and free will, and so and this gives him maybe a higher state of a real spiritual path, or a feeling. Maybe this is a part of the answer.
Well, our institutional religion in the United States can be an enemy to spirituality. It can. First of all, we have services once a week, and they tend to be kind of boring. They tend to be so organized that people can't feel intense feelings during them. It's all about our outer behavior, not about our inner feelings. And it's kind of hard just to turn on inner feelings 1 hour a week, the way we come together in our organized religions. But then too, organized religions are institutions that have authorities and that require that others subordinate themselves, obey them, follow them, and don't question them, and don't stray in their own individual paths, but instead they conform. And all of this is probably not helpful for the inner spiritualities. I feel, though, that I almost need to say the opposite thing here, just to add that if there's a problem with the spiritual but not religious movement in the United States, it's maybe they don't appreciate that institutions in the long run of life are important, and they uphold a tradition and teachings and values and concerns. So, you know, it's a balance in life. The importance of the individual questing and the importance of the group being stable over time. These are both important needs for humans. There's some give and take.
Doctor, can we present an analysis here for also established religions or the institutional religions or churches or places of worship, that there is an spiritual understanding for these places because of the very beautiful art that is there, because of the music and the singing, the sacred singings, because of the calmness, and because of the meditation that these places offer. Even if a person wants to go there and feel his spirituality without another person from the institution reading for him. So I think even institutional religions, they may offer a certain type of spirituality where these people are looking for also.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you're asking me, you're posing a question of what?
It's a question or an analysis, or we think together, so
yeah.
You can comment.
Look, I think the core of spirituality comes down to one emotional state: wonder. Wonder is the experience of something that we don't understand. It surpasses us, and yet we're curious about it. We're drawn to it. We're not afraid. We're not defensive about it, but we're drawn to understanding a reality higher and more beyond our human abilities to understand. Institutions can squash wonder. Religious institutions can tell us, don't be curious, don't ask questions, don't wonder, just obey, just do the behaviors. And we need wonder constantly cultivated in our lives. If a spiritual experience can be reduced to one word, they're about wonder. They're about opening us up to something beyond ourselves that our brains will never fully comprehend, never fully. There's a mystery, and yet we delight in that mystery. Wonder brings a delight in this feeling that I don't fully understand, but I am drawn to this. And I think that institutions can squash wonder, and that's a problem. And I think that spirituality will be alive only when the experience of wonder is kindled in people and excited in people. And in each of our lives, there are those moments that make religion real to us, alive for us.
Dr. Hira, can we talk about certain commonalities and similarities and areas of intersect between Sufism, Sufi literature and Sufi poetry, whether it was with Shakespeare or whether it was with Persian or Arabic literature, or all around different languages and societies? Because even it's a growing sector and the field in the academic studies in the United States, and even among different people, every library now will contain books and poems for Rumi or for Attar or for these Persian literature. So is it something which is coming close to the spiritual thirst of, or these new types of spirituality they're talking about, so we can compare and bring them together also?
Yeah. Well, of course, the Sufi tradition is not known extremely well by most Americans, but all Americans know of it. And if you were to go to an American bookstore, you will find books on the Sufi tradition. And so just like there are aspects of say, religion in India, I'm thinking of not this, because there's a presence of Sufi in India too, but Americans are more interested in yoga and what they call the Vedanta tradition that's about mystical experience. But the Sufi tradition is exactly, I think, about what I've been referring to as saying that spirituality is alive mostly to the extent that within individuals there's this sense of spark of the infinite presence or a universal presence being apprehended, invoking that sense of humility and wonder. But as you well know, that for those very reasons, the Sufi tradition is viewed with suspicion in many parts of the world too. That it's thought to be anti-authority and anti-stability and anti-stability in community life. What do you think? Is the Sufi tradition compatible with social stability, or does it work against it?
Actually, in many places, many societies, it's against, because it's focusing on the what we call Wojoohar, the essence of religions, the spiritual dimension. Whereas sometimes there is conflict between the institutional religion or the ordinary religion and these very deep spiritual dimensions. So yeah, there is problems, conflicts, contradictory between them. You'd like to comment about my comment about Sufism?
No, it's just that I would say that the Sufi tradition is revered by most Americans who explore world spiritualities. It's one of the most revered traditions, and its poets and its authors are quoted commonly, and there's a real sense that of commonality. I think if anyone were trying to make the argument of finding things in all parts of the world, traditions we tend to call Buddhist or Hindu or Christian or Muslim, we find in the Sufi tradition that kind of common element that we can find in all of those. Some would argue, and I would argue, the best of them. The best aspects of those traditions.
So the Sufi dimensions of different religions is a place that we can come together and connect together more and dialogue more and understand each other more, and maybe understand the depth of religions more. Maybe it's a place where a transcendent unity can be found in a way or another.
Right. I think that I think that at that level, one might say that all religions converge, and there's no disagreement on the principles that Sufi represents. I think you will find people in all world religious traditions have championed those same themes.
And nowadays we have studies in English and Arabic and Persian about the commonalities between Meister Eckhart in Christianity and Ibn Arabi in Islam, or for example, the commonalities between Buddhism and Islam, or for example, Shankara from the Eastern tradition and Eckhart and Ibn Arabi, or a comparison between Taoism in the East and Sufism in Islam. So you find all different types of commonality and people who are trying to find similarities between such Sufi traditions among different geographical places.
Yeah. And, there's been a lot of conversations about that. Maybe it's time we have another. Are you aware of our Parliament of World Religions that was held in the United States in 1893 to try to bring spokespersons for all these traditions to find those commonalities? And there's been attempts here and there to renew those conversations, to find those common grounds.
Doctor, you mentioned a very nice idea, which is the idea of wonder or perplexity or confusion, because also in the Sufi doctrine they focus too much about this notion. They call it the notion of Hira or Hira. It's same as wonder, and they say the essence of a real spiritual feeling or experience is about love or about Hira or about wonder, or about this stuff. So this is something that we can find in both places.
Well, first of all, there's many human emotions. There's anger, right? There's hatred, there's joy, there's feeling guilty. So there's many human emotions. Wonder is the least studied of them because it's hard. But here are some attributes of wonder, and you'll see why then I'm going to say wonder is the most spiritual of all human emotions. And I would go so far as to say the experience of wonder is a spiritual experience. But first of all, there's a sense that there's some reality more than your brain can explain. that you're befuddled. You just don't know what it is that's confronting you in wonder. I wonder why this is happening. Secondly, it's a sense that you're drawn towards it. You're not cowering from it. There's something about it that attracts you, that draws you. And then thirdly, it sparks a sense that you're small in front of this, that you are smaller than the reality that you wonder about. And that finally, it opens up into you. It puts aside all of your concerns for your worldly self. You know, just as that Emerson quote we had earlier, I put all mean egotism, and he meant my everyday self-centered thinking. It goes aside. And this, when we put our selfish concerns aside, we can have care and compassion for others. So if you look at these attributes, a sense that there's a grander reality than my brain can understand, that I'm attracted towards it, that I put my selfish concerns aside and care about a larger reality and want to care for it. These are what I think all spiritual experiences have. I once said something, and this everyone won't like what I say here, and that's okay with me. But I've said many times that religion, at the end of the day, isn't about truth. If you mean truth the way mathematics or physics or chemistry, some of our natural sciences have truth. Religion, to me, at its very best, is about cultivating a sense of wonder for the universe, opening up our sense that there's more to reality than our brains can fully do, to draw us out towards it, to appreciate how sacred this universe is, and to make us have compassion and care for it. All of these are elements, to me, of spiritual experience, are these same traits of wonder. And so that's why I so much bring discussions of wonder into discussions of spirituality, because wonder can be triggered. By the way, I know people listening to music who have this emotion of wonder generated. I know people who, while doing mathematics, see patterns and beauty, and they wonder how there can be these patterns and beauty in the universe, and wonder is triggered in that. I know people who, in loving conversations with best friends, see their friend as an agent of all creation that they don't understand, and the love, it brings wonder in a human relationship. And I've seen wonder in what we call all of the various spiritual traditions. So wonder is an emotion that I admire. I have some of it in my life. I try to cultivate it to the best you can. And I admire any tradition that can lift out and create experiences of wonder in individuals. And for me, experiences of wonder and spiritual experiences end up being basically the same thing.
A beautiful definition about wonder, actually. Doctor, I'd like to, you mentioned earlier about Mírsía إلياد, and you met him in the beginning of your academic life. And yeah. So do you recall any memory, something about his personality, or something about his theories that you'd like to say other than what we said?
I'll only say this. He was curious about, I'm going to use the word supernatural, what is more than nature, metaphysical. He had a core of energy and curiosity and conviction that there were experiences possible for humans that science can't understand and will never, using its current understandings of the universe, understand. He was, to his very core, committed to metaphysical, supernatural reality. And he did so in a way that was lively for him. He thirsted for more knowledge of it, but he was utterly convinced of it. I have not, oh boy, it's been, if I ever did really read it, it was decades ago. He's written some biographical material about his early life that had those examples.
Was he only academic, or he had a certain religious practice or a certain type of spiritual involvement or something?
Not that I know of. If he did, I'm unaware of it. He was a much older, he was a world famous scholar in his very final days of teaching when I arrived at the University of Chicago. So I definitely attended some of his lectures. I was in the hallways with him, but I didn't know him, or there's a lot about him I don't know.
Dr. Robert, we're reaching to the end of our interview. So here I'd like to ask you about a very interesting or a joyful or a fascinating theory or an idea that you've gone through in the field of study about religion, spirituality, and psychology, if you'd like to share.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much. Ever since the discipline of modern scientific psychology began, there's always been a curiosity about religion, because religion stands at the frontier of psychology. If psychology is studying the human brain, is there something beyond the brain? Now, Sigmund Freud studied this, and he was a psychologist, really, he was a medical doctor, and he was anti-religion. He thought, he championed a narrow science, etc., and I admire that. I've learned a lot from reading him, but not about religion. Carl Jung was another, but he said that there's consciousness beyond. He had a phrase called the collective unconscious that goes beyond our normal waking mind. And this is why students of spirituality find Jung very helpful in the understanding. But my favorite psychologist was an American who was at Harvard University, trained as a medical doctor, and he then became a psychologist, and his name was William James. And William James understood the brain in the best terms of the medical science of his day. And yet he said there's something more, and it's religious experiences that show us there is a metaphysical reality and perhaps a meta-consciousness. Something about our individual consciousness opens up to a wider universe. And his book, Varieties of Religious Experience, and some of his other writings are probably the readings that have most excited me, because they bridge the scientific world and the spiritual philosophy. And James walked that line. Sometimes he wavered more to science. Sometimes he wavered more to spiritual philosophy. And he went a little bit back and forth, but he was always trying to find where the one connects with the other. And I think I've spent the last several decades of my life trying to walk that same line, sometimes leaning a little bit one way and the other. But it has been his writings that have probably guided me more than any other individual.
Doctor, we live in an era of which is called post-modernity, an era of globalization, an era of a very small village. Technologies are getting developed more and more. So some philosophers think, or they state such ideas, which is a human being have been replaced to a mechanical machine. And this is based on the materialistic cosmic view, which equals the human being to nature and other creatures even, such as plants and animals. Thus, any spiritual, ethical, virtuous, or metaphysical dimension, or a dimension of beauty and even music and art is being neglected the more modernity, technology, and modern development takes place. And this leads to the destruction of the secret magic and the transcendent dimension in the human being. And this is one of the great challenges that faces humanity in this era. So how can you comment about such philosophers?
Yeah. Well, I understand the word modern to be embracing science, and to be embracing science as the only path to reliable knowledge. I understand postmodern as, yes, science has been a fabulous guide to so much important practical knowledge, but postmodern to me symbolizes, but I do not recognize science as the only tool to understanding or appreciating our universe, or to opening up horizons of my life. And so I think that the postmodern world is going to be very spiritual. We also have a word called parochial and a word called cosmopolitan. Parochial means a narrow tradition by time, geography, and cosmopolitan, a more worldwide universal view. I think that the postmodern world will not be parochial. It'll find in traditions rooted in a place, rooted in a specific group of people. It'll find important ideas, but the postmodern world will see it expressed in ways that are more cosmopolitan, more universal, more shared by other people, other traditions. And so I think that any spirituality that we see is going to be less parochial and more cosmopolitan. But the questions that make us humans, where did it all come from? What is the ultimate source of life? How is it that I woke up this morning and found myself alive in a universe humanity didn't create? It's a gift to us. How should I live my life? When I draw my last breath of life on planet Earth, what should I want to have done with my life? What would make my life good or important? These are the questions that I think will be just as alive and just as real in our postmodern world as they were at any other time. We're going to see them expressed with less conformity. It'll be interesting to see. We might be able to see, I mentioned some patterns earlier about patterns I'm seeing in the United States and those people who are still very spiritual, but not joining religious organizations or feeling members of them. So it'll be interesting to see the patterns that world spirituality takes, and maybe your podcast is a place that we're going to see some of that. And maybe a goal could be to see, are we finding certain patterns emerging? And that will be interesting. But I think the postmodern world is not one that humans are going to be reduced to automation. It's going to be where I think we absolutely claim what's uniquely and distinctively human, and that's the concern for spiritual philosophy.
A more balanced life, you mean?
Right?
A more balanced life.
A more balanced life, and I think we are having that. I think we can all affirm that for all the problems in the world, we see more of that than any other generation could have said. I'm not trying to downplay our conflicts and our problems. I'm not. But I am saying that we can't say there hasn't been progress. And I think there's more ability to talk about and spiritual philosophy today than at any time in world history. This podcast right today, taking over 2 continents, and I'm trying to quick guesstimate 10,000 miles apart, is an example of that.
And Doctor, is it true that like some people think or believe that the more a society becomes religious in the sense of obeying some rules and rituals or following some theologies or being involved in institutional religion, so the more society becomes like this, the more it faces social problems, difficulties, tense, hatred, or this is a biased view?
Well, look, that's a great question, and I can't say, but whenever there's an attempt to induce conformity, and I don't care, take it away from religion. I think, boy, will I get in trouble here? And I think of the way the totally non-religious principles of communism in China attempt to put conformity. Conflict is going to emerge because you can only force subordination for so long. So in that sense, I think that there's always going to be a problem of when religion is based on the concept of power over rather than power from within. And I think that it inherently has conflict.
Here we may say that some thinkers or groups or societies, they're trying to present their established religion with different dimensions. So they include the spiritual depth, the experience, the Sufi point of view.
Yeah.
So they shape it in a way that's not against the free will of the people. That's not against their choices.
Yeah.
So they find a balanced.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a balance. And if that can be achieved, then you could have a very, if you will, even traditionally religious culture, as long as there's that balance, then I think that there would be harmony. It's achieving that balance, and the needs that bring vitality to the individual and the needs that bring vitality to the group, and they're both important perspectives, and humans only rarely achieve a healthy balance between the two, but obviously that would be a goal.
And I think one of the greatest graces that we live nowadays, as you mentioned in your article, that maybe before several decades or years, mystical theology was only associated with the classic spirituality, but nowadays mysticism is an inner hidden realization of many different people all around. It's not necessarily related to a church or to a certain religion. No, it's more open, and people are realizing that more and more. And
yeah, and podcasts such as this are one of the ways that they do learn and think more and more. And it's not the goal of this to make anyone think one way or another, but to show them the alternative ways they might think and let them pick and choose what seems to work for them. And I think we have many healthy expressions of that in the world for spirituality today that didn't exist in previous times of human history. And so that's what's exciting about being alive today.
Yeah, and this is always very beautiful about the diversity and pluralism. When a person studies spirituality and religion, he widens his horizons. He gets to know the diversity of such things, and he respects them more.
Yep.
So thank you very much, Dr. Professor Robert Fuller, for being with us, for sharing all this
fun. And I just so admire the work you're doing. And you bring an intelligence to it, and kind of how can I put, an energy and passion with it, and that comes across. And I very much admire your work.
Thank you very much.
Okay.